So let's talk about functions. So far you've been creating your programs in a function called main. And a function is just a bunch of code in a block with a start bracket, and then we have our end bracket down here. And a function has a name, and a function has a return type, and we always use these parentheses with our function. And I'm going to explain all this in detail, but I just wanted to let you know that you've already been creating a function. And we're also going to talk about why do we need functions and where would we use functions. So right now, all of my code is in a function called main. And this is the function that runs when we run our program. So we declare a variable, we print out a welcome message, we prompt for an integer, we read it in, we make sure that that number is positive, or we keep prompting for a new integer, and then we test to see if the integer is even. If it's not, it'll print out odd, and then we print out a goodbye message. So the idea behind a function is to abstract some of the code. So we can divide this program up into several different functions, because really this is doing one task, this is doing one task, this is doing one task, and then the goodbye message is another task. So each function should really be concerned with executing one task. A function is exactly like a mathematic function. There are two parts to creating a function. First, you have to define a function. Like in math, we would say f of x is equal to x plus 2. This is the function definition. To execute this function, we can pass it a value. So I'll pass it 2. And this function evaluates or returns 4, right? 2 is passed into the x variable. We're going to add 2, and that evaluates to 4. If I call the function and I pass it 3, this will return a 5. So this is the function definition. And then once the function is defined, we can call it over and over. So that allows us to reuse code without having to type it over and over. So there are a couple different types of functions, and when you create a function, you always have to specify specific information in what's called the function header. And we can have functions that when we call them, just do something and then finish. Or we can have a function where we pass it some information and it does something and then finishes. Or we can have a function that we give information to, it does something, and then it returns a piece of information. Or we can have a function that we call and we don't pass it any information, but it does something and it returns information. And all that is defined within the setup of the function. So let's write a function that prints our welcome message. So I'm going to go down to the bottom and I'm going to define my function. And so there are 3 parts to the function header. You first have to specify what kind of information this function is going to return. And this function is not going to return any information. It's just going to do something and then finish. So this is a special type of a function called a void function. And then you have to give the function a name. I'm just going to call this the intro. And then we have to have these parentheses. And then we're going to create the block for the function. So this is the function definition. What this function does is all defined within the block. And what my function intro will do is all of this stuff. So I'm going to cut that out of my main function and I'm going to paste it into my intro function. And when we define a function, this function will not run unless we invoke it or we call it. And to call a function, you just give it its name. So I would just say intro and then the parentheses with nothing inside the parentheses. This is a call to intro. So how this will be executed is when I run my program, it finds the main function and then it starts executing the statements within main. So it will create the num variable and then it's going to call intro. And what this is going to cause the program to do is to jump to the intro definition and then execute lines 33 through 36. And as soon as I hit the end of the function, the flow will go back up to the point at which it was called. And then the flow will just continue on. So in C++, there's one more part that you have to remember, and that is to create a function prototype at the beginning. So this is where we're going to put our function prototypes. And all this area does is tell main that we are going to be creating an intro function, but it's going to be down below, but it will be there. And so we have to put the prototype at the top so that main will know that. So I'm going to say void, it's a void function, and then intro, and then I'm just going to put a semicolon at the end. And now I'm ready to run my program. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. And you can see that my intro message was displayed. And now we are on line 13. We've prompted the user to enter a positive integer. And CN is waiting for the user to type that in.